Okay, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for coming. Thank you. All right, so we're going to do the Hakdama, the introduction to Sefer Chofetz Chaim. Now, there's probably no, at least I can't think of any mitzvah that's as closely associated with one person as Shemiras Halashon is with the Chofetz Chaim. I think he really, even as he says in his introduction, he really started a revolution, both as far as knowledge of the halachos and awareness of the gravity of the transgression of Lashon Hara. And I think it's really his legacy that now there's more of an awareness of it.
Oh, another tzaddik came. He's another tzaddik. Oh, we need another tzaddikim.
You know, as far as keeping it, being careful about it might be another story. But certainly, as far as knowing that it's bad and being, if you ask anyone nowadays, they'll tell you Lashon Hara is very bad. As we'll see later in the introduction, he says around his time, people just didn't view it, more or less viewed it as a midas chasidus, not to speak Lashon Hara more above the letter of the law, but didn't quite understand that. Me'ikar adin, the basic letter of the law that involved in speaking Lashon Hara, there are actually, he delineates there are several transgressions involved. So a little bit of biographical information. So there are different, dates that people say that he was born. I guess he didn't have a birth certificate. I heard years ago it was 1838 to 1933. So Wikipedia says 1839. I think it may have been actually the New York Times, an American newspaper that said that he was 105 when he passed away. So that would be 10 years earlier. But whatever it is, he definitely. What, sorry?
I don't think that's his granddaughter. Because she didn't know either. He was born in Redlands, so doesn't know.
I mean,
when he was born, I don't know when my I don't know when my grandfather was born because there weren't such good records.
I mean, even I know my grandmother, her mother was born in Lithuania, and she said she was born around 18 something, and even though it wasn't so long, I mean, 10.
That's his granddaughter.
Okay.
I don't know when my grandfather was born. If you're not, didn't keep good records at the time. His granddaughter is on the screen.
So he actually wrote this anonymously, and he actually. I think a lot of people don't know, he wrote perhaps a dozen or more works. Probably most famously is Sefer Chofetz Chaim and Shemiras Halashon, and the Mishnah Berurah. Those are probably the two well-known, but he also wrote a book, Machane Yisrael, the halachos of Jews in the army. He wrote Svarim on Kachim. He was a Kohen himself, and he wrote for the laws of Kohanim. So he really left a lasting legacy. And I think many of us, certainly me personally, addition when you think of righteous people, when you think of people you want to emulate, really, the Chofetz Chaim is usually on the top of the list. So with that we'll begin. The introduction is about 14 pages, so I think we're not going to go line by line, but I tried to pick out the parts that I figure that we could cover today. So he starts out really by explaining how the sin of Lashon Hara he starts out by saying that Hashem, he separated us from the nations of the world, that he gave us the special connection with him to have the privilege of having Nevi'im, of being rebuked by Nevi'im, and all of that was an opportunity that was lost with the destruction of the Batei Mikdash. So the Gemara says that the first Beis HaMikdash was destroyed because of Gilui Raya, Shvichas Damim, and Avodah Zarah, murder, sexual immorality, and idolatry. And it says the second one was destroyed because of Sinas Chinam. He said that perhaps a primary aspect of Sinas Chinam, of baseless hatred, is the speaking of Lashon Hara. And he said it must be, if both of the Batei Mikdash were destroyed, it must be that there's an aspect, at least, of Lashon Hara that's as terrible as Avodah Zarah, murder, and idolatry. One of the reasons why he says is because if you know it's halacha, you're disregarding it, so essentially you're denying the whole Torah. But And he says that this is the reason for our galus. Even it goes back that when Moshe Rabbeinu saw the Egyptian beating the Jew, so he says now the matter is known. So he quotes the Medrash that says that it's known because there was strife amongst the Jewish people, that also the sin of the spies was also that they spoke Lashon Hara. So he explains that Lashon Hara is the cause of our galus, so therefore to get out of galus, rectifying the sin of Lashon Hara is really the only way to do it. So he continues to explain that, and it's really a scary thought, that quotes the Zohar, he quotes other sources, that when we speak down here, it creates certain accusers up on high. So then that blocks the positive energies from coming in, and that even I guess in general, when we speak against each other, then Hashem scrutinizes our actions too. The way that we scrutinize others, Hashem is gonna scrutinize ours, and Mida Keneged Mida, right? And also, there's an idea with tshuva that if we forgive others, Hashem is more likely to forgive us. And so another thing that he mentioned is that when we speak Lashon Hara, we're mitame our mouth. We impurify our mouth, and the mouth and the tongue are vehicles for learning Torah, for davening. So we speak Lashon Hara, we speak negative speech, and then we speak that, and then we go to daven. So it's like we're davening with tamei kelim. Yeah. It's like a doctor could be the most talented physician, and he knows how to do a surgery, but he does the surgery with infected, unsterilized equipment. It's going to be disastrous. So that's really what if we speak Lashon Hara, we are metame our mouths, are the vehicle that we have for tefillah, so then
the sacrifice brought for Tzarat is Olah, right? Yeah. Which is what you usually bring for Me'ilah when you use something that's sanctified outside of the Beit HaMikdash. And the Sforno actually says something very similar, that the reason that you bring a Me'ilah, basically what you would bring for Me'ilah, is because your mouth is for holy purposes, and when you speak Lashon Hara, which is what leads to Tzarat, then what you're doing is you're using your mouth, which is meant for holy things, for the profane. So it's very similar. Right. And
Rabbeinu Yonah mentions in Pirkei Avos that your mouth is a kli shares, right? So you're using it for a function. Not only it's not made for, but really that's the opposite of what it is. He also quotes the Gemara in Brachos that really because of this, the same idea, it says biyom shenechra Beis HaMikdash, from the day that the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, choma shel barzel mafsakas ben Yisrael laviyim shabashamayim, that there is this blockage of being able to connect with the Ribono Shel Olam. Okay, so now I think we'll go a little more inside. So after all of this, after explaining how terrible it is, and also he's doing it by quoting other sources. He's not making it up.
Sorry, I'm late.
Oh, we're just getting to the introduction to Sefer Chofetz Chaim.
Go ahead.
So after explaining how terrible it is, and doing so already by citing sources, he actually also wrote the Be'er Mayim Chaim, which really gives all the Mara Makomos, all the citations for not speaking Lashon Hara. And I think it goes to to say there's been more of since the Chofetz Chaim wrote a Sefer, there's more of an awareness of Lashon Hara. So people, I know I've heard people say close to it, oh, you can't speak Lashon Hara because the Chofetz Chaim says you can't speak Lashon Hara. Someone say you believe that, you're essentially not Bikoros. No, the Torah says you can't speak Lashon Hara. So we should remember, and he'll continue to emphasize how this is not something that's made up or even something that's beyond the letter of the law, but something that is a basic requirement. So after saying all of this, he says, okay, so why do people not take Lashon Hara seriously?
Yeah.
So he says, why is this not even considered? Why don't people take this seriously or even have a second thought about it? I thought of several reasons. So you have the reason why do the people who don't really know, who aren't particularly big Torah scholars, why do they say it? And why do people who are Torah scholars speak Lashon Hara? So he says, Hamon enam yodim klal iser Lashon Hara hu afilu ala emes. So the average people don't know, and I think there's still a misconception by many that Lashon Hara is not saying false information. Lashon Hara actually is specifically saying information that's true. Motzei Shemra is saying false information. Lashon Hara, the sin of Lashon Hara, is on true information, on relating entirely true facts. I'm sorry? It could be real news.
News. Lashon Hara is real.
Also known as news.
And that could also be
known as news.
that could also be a question, right? What I guess especially with from publications, I assume they have posting where they go to. What news is permitted to report? That may not be so simple.
Once everybody once out there, it's not.
It could be. He actually says here that it could be. I mean, that could be.
Public is the problem is if you're a newspaper, it has to become public because you're printing it.
Right.
So he
publish known information is not.
so he writes later on in the introduction. He writes later on in the introduction that there is a concept, and it's a true concept called apei tlasa. If something is known like three people, so presumably it's already out there. He says, and in the book he goes into more detail that it's not so simple that you can speak about something that's more well known. So while there is that certainly.
But if you tell something to three people, that's already going to be.
So that is why there's a principle of that. The question is, it's not just totally a free-for-all, even if that's known. So he goes in, he mentions the introduction that's actually another misconception. It's a misconception he groups in the misconception that Talmidei Chachamim have. So they actually know what they did have. So it's I guess maybe a better misconception, more advanced misconception to have. But even with that, it's not so simple that it's just a free-for-all. So the people who are not particularly learned don't realize that Lashon Hara is on true information. So the people who are more learned know that Lashon Hara is even on true information. So their Yetzer Hara manipulates them into justifying the saying of Lashon Hara. So echad, firstly, shetekev makshiv hayetzer hara, v'ayonav ala ish shehu misaper alav lechonev, omer lo mitzvah lefarsem es hakanefim harishayim. So he'll say this is person who everyone thinks is such a great guy, but he's really not so great. So yeah, it's a mitzvah for me to tell everyone about it. In other words, as a more learned person, I know that there are certain hetera. Maybe there are even people who, in fact, it is a mitzvah to speak Lashon Hara about. But I think that this person is in that category. So pam omer lo halo ploni hu bal machlokes and muter l'saper Lashon Hara alav. Lefamim hu mevateu behetera. So another thing is this heter of apei tlasa. So two things that he just mentioned. That one. And honestly, I think it's true, and I admit for many of, if not most of these things he says in the Sefer, at least I find that at one point or another, probably too often, I've been guilty of that. But we think, especially now in Facebook and the blogosphere, and even in publications, that I imagine people think that some of the sometimes vile things that are said about people, they think, okay, maybe this person isn't included in Amitecha. Right. Maybe this person, it's allowed to speak Lashon Hara about. And many of those things, in theory, are true. You are allowed to speak Lashon Hara if it's Toelis. Whether you're allowed to believe it, even in those situations, isn't... I'm sorry?
For constructive purposes.
Sorry. So that's true. There are also people who have the status of Rishaim. Again, how one would gain that status, especially nowadays, may be subject to specific details. And for those people, especially to warn people that they're in danger spiritually, physically, then one is allowed to speak Lashon Hara about. But I dare say that just because you disagree with someone, either in matters of Yiddishkeit or in other things, it doesn't automatically thrust them into the category of someone who you're allowed to.
Sometimes even if someone is a Russia and you say that, you don't realize how many other people are going to jump on that and talk about how bad the person is. It happened to me once where this person was really a bad person and they were Nevazah Talmidei Chachamim and they attacked Israel and they said a bunch of things that were very dangerous and I said something and then 20 people jumped on because I guess it was on the internet. I didn't think about it. 20 people jumped on and they started talking personally how awful this person was. And I felt awful because I didn't. I wanted to say something, but I didn't want be careful what you write on Facebook.
Well, there's a category, and the Gemara actually saes everyone's guilty of it, called avak lashon hara, the dust of lashon hara. So I'm not saying lashon hara, but I mentioned someone's name, and I think this happens on Facebook and on blogs. You mentioned someone's name, so I post an article that someone wrote. I'm not saying anything. I'm not even putting any comment, but let's just all.
But it happens even when that's not necessarily your intention.
Posting an article, not really.
Yeah,
it could be good. I mean, you don't know what kind of reaction you're gonna necessarily.
Right,
get.
but if
you find an interest in article and you post it, really Lashon Hara.
So I could think of one article or one report a couple years ago that was about someone I personally know to be a great person. And there was an article posted on one of the news sites, maybe have even been a story of interest because there were some interesting facts about the story that if you were to read it in a non-critical way, you could gain from, but is published, I think, on a site that maybe didn't have the most favorable orientation towards him, and he commented probably 150 comments just maligning this person. So that would probably be avak lashon hara. We have to be careful what.
But does Lashon Hara only apply to a Jewish person? No.
So Lashon Hara does, it says Amitecha. The Chofetz Chaim does say later on that to not become accustomed to speak. If you speak Lashon, I think it's true with many mitos. It's hard to compartmentalize. Especially I'm going to be nice to my family, I'm not going to be nice to this. If someone is used to, and I think it's probably true. If someone is used to speaking Lashon Hara freely, people who are included in the Yisr, it's probably not unlikely that they're also going to speak about.
What about political figures?
Also, we don't even know who's Jewish anymore anyway.
So maybe err on the side of caution.
Even Jared Kushner.
He's
post
Jewish.
something. I'm saying people write all about the Shabbos thing with him and whatever.
Yeah, I think that is Lashon Hara a lot.
Yeah, I don't know what I'm.
Published.
But no,
I don't know if that's true once it's published because people may not know that. I remember the OU once.
No.
Him not keeping Shabbat probably is Lashon Hara of a kind.
The public knows about it.
No, I said there is a leniency. There is so about that. There is, and there in the book there are many details to it. There is a leniency, as we said, ape twasa, in front of 3 people, or certainly more than 3 people, where there are leniencies that you'd be allowed to say. He just wrote over here that, and those are the things that the lomdim know, the people maybe like us who are more knowledgeable. We know there's a concept that if something has been public, then there could be leniencies. But he says it's one of the misconceptions that people have that it's just a free for all. So
we talk about anybody.
Maybe we shouldn't. Maybe that's the answer.
So how's the news going to work? So if you're Jewish, you can't be in the news.
Maybe in a perfect world, we would only report on those things that are necessary to learn. We have to report.
Positive or not.
Look at how the Hamas
If it's for Toilas,
So
The news is Toelis.
And I think there's a case.
If the news is right.
And I think there's probably a case to be made that it is. Again, you see this book is very thick.
Right.
This is the introduction. He says because these are halachos.
2 books in one.
Right. Okay. Fine. So till here. Well, one is halachos. One. So Chofetz Chaim is more of the halachos. Shemiras Halashon is more where. But the point is there are many dinim to it, and he writes later on in the introduction that people make mistakes on both ends. They think, okay, there's so many dinim, I don't know them, and too complicated, so why should I even try? And then there are people who think that it's impossible to not speak Lashon Hara. It's impossible to speak that everything I could possibly say is Lashon Hara. So he says here, those people say, okay, it's too hard. What am I going to do? I'm not going to speak. I think you have, this comes up, unfortunately, Rabbi Daniel Z. Feldman at YU wrote a book, actually, Lashon Hara, with things like blogs and the internet and news sources. But I was listening to some shiurim by him. He opens up by saying that unfortunately you have with people who don't know the laws, who are well-intentioned, who want to avoid speaking Lashon Hara, they often will not speak about things that one is required to speak about because they don't want to speak Lashon Hara. Unfortunately, if someone is abusing someone, or even with a whole complicated thing with dating, if there's a piece of information that's not being revealed and they're not going to say, and that could be harmful. So there are situations where not only is it allowed, but you're required to speak Lashon Hara. And because
But you probably have to find out say that thing,
right, you don't.
You can't just go and be like, this person does that. You might need to find out if you really should be telling.
Right, exactly, and it's
how. Or if the person did something like 10 years ago, is it really
exactly. There are
ridiculous dating, because you might think for you, I knew that about the girl, it would be totally over, and it's never gonna work. And for that guy, I'm assuming she's not a bad person, but you thought you had information that might change his opinion of her, but it might not be a problem.
100%, and that's why the whole discussion with that. I think the Stipler has the most limited application. He says if it's only something that if you're married, you would not want to be married. There are others who have a little more expansive that if you definitely would not have gone out or break off the engagement. But again, a whole sugya in and of itself. But absolutely, there are certain things that you don't just need to yenta about, and maybe that isn't, and maybe the person wouldn't care about, or also maybe you can assume the person will tell them themselves, and that don't need to be revealed earlier on. So there are many factors to that, but the mistake sometimes that people make in the other direction is that when you think that everything is forbidden, so then people oftentimes don't say things, and it probably comes up with situations of abuse, unfortunately, that people don't say things that are required to say, and as a result, people are harmed. So another thing that he mentions, this is also, I think something that we fall prey to is Kabbalah's Lashon Hara, of listening to Lashon Hara. He says people also don't realize it is forbidden to listen to Lashon Hara. We think, and I've been guilty of this, I'm just speaking for myself, and we probably know people maybe who have also succumb to this, that okay, we're not going to speak Lashon Hara in a particular conversation, and maybe we don't even like the fact that people are speaking Lashon Hara about this person. Okay, so we'll listen to it. We're not going to say anything, but we want to overhear the conversation. We want to listen in, and maybe we don't say something ourselves. So he points out that that is a prohibition of Kabbalah's Lashon Hara, of listening to Lashon Hara, and in fact.
Listening is being a problem.
Yeah. Well, no.
Well, believing.
You can listen, but not being a problem.
Well, right. There's also.
You have to be careful not to encourage the guy who's speaking.
Right.
Right. It could even be
Being
worse.
there, right? Even if you're like paying attention.
Right. There's also the idea of believing lashon hara, even if it's toelis,
Right.
may not be. Maybe you can take it into consideration, but you can't necessarily believe it. But
You can't assume that it's fact.
you can, right? It could be that you're allowed to say it, but then you still have to investigate. It should just be brought to your attention. But if you think about it, perhaps the people who just listen to lashon hara are doing something even worse, because a person wouldn't say lashon hara if they didn't have an audience. If you're really saying lashon hara because they have an audience that listens, maybe who doesn't even respond. So you're right. So we have to be very careful about that. So he writes that so here he makes clear that, as he said in the beginning, that Shasefer is that this book hibarti al pi midas lo hibarti al pi midas chasidus rak b'tzad hadin. That don't think that this book is saying some things that are beyond the letter of the law and that are only for the pious people. That these are actually the basic letters of the law, and he writes that that's why he cites sources here, and in the notes, the Sefer Chaim, he cites in even more detail, and that we should be aware that these are actually halachos and not anything that's beyond the letter of the law. So then he addresses a question. So what about, we have a principle, muta shahayu shavugan v'al yumezidin. There's a principle that perhaps if and it comes up, maybe even dealing with people who aren't yet observant or people who might not listen, that there are some cases where even if there's an obligation of ochayach techiyach, of giving rebuke to someone who's breaking halacha, but it could be that if someone's not going to listen, so then you don't give them rebuke, because we have the concept that it's better to do something b'shogeg, to do something with ignorance rather than know that it's wrong and do it. So he says, what about that? Maybe because people aren't going to follow it, we should apply this principle, mufta shogeg v'al yumazidin. But he says that it's not true for two reasons. He says it's not true for a davar hamafurish b'Torah. For something that the Torah explicitly says, you don't apply that principle. So obviously, don't kill, don't steal, things like that. It could be okay. So particular laws about Shabbos are either derabbanans or even deraisas are not mentioned in the Torah. So maybe then you might apply that principle. But something that's explicitly written in the Torah, so then you would not apply the principle.
Ignorance is not a defense, in other words.
It's not a defense. Right.
Expected to know.
I think it could be that that this could apply to deoraisas, but not something that the Torah explicitly says.
Oh.
Meaning for Shabbos, you have 39 malachos. They are deoraisa. We know from Torah Shebal Peh what they are. So maybe it could be that borer, it could be a deoraisa, but the Torah doesn't say thou shalt not borer. Then maybe that principle would apply. But the Torah explicitly lists the prohibition of rechilas, of lashon hara and rechilas. Of lashon hara is saying negative information. Rechilas is really gossip. It's passing along or peddling. Literally, that's what it means. That did you hear what so and so said or what so and so did? And then he writes that, and I think we know this. The pull to speak lashon hara is tremendously strong, perhaps among the strongest of any types of transgressions. I was wondering if anyone has any takes on why that might be.
Because you might not even realize you're doing it.
Right.
It comes so naturally just to speak that it's hard to let's be so conscious of it.
Right.
So that's what also makes it a difficult thing to monitor.
Right. You don't really have to do inaction, and you have a concept in other places that the dibur is not, that speaking is not necessarily a mice. Other things you have to do, you actually have to get up and do it.
It's not like you're picking up a book necessarily and deciding to hold it.
I think the other thing is like people are so, we value friendships and communities and things like that, especially in Judaism. And that could be twisted to be like, well, let me build my friendship and community by talking about the latest stuff about like the other people.
Right. Maybe if we don't speak Lashon Hara, I mean, the more so if we give tochacha to someone else, maybe they'll think, okay, why do, he's no fun to be around, or even we may want to join a conversation. Maybe we'll think that's a way to gain friendship. And he writes that it's something that's, even among people who are very meticulous in their observance, it's something that's not taken seriously. You don't have the social stigma regarding saying Lashon Hara. And I think even among people who are aware that there are Isurim, or even aware of some of the parameters of it, they'll say, okay, maybe it's not really Lashon Hara, or it's probably Toelis, it's probably for constructive purpose. Maybe you could be allowed to say Lashon Hara in this case, but you give this analogy. People are, and I think correctly so, people are very meticulous in the hashgachas from which they'll eat, both in products and in restaurants. And sometimes people phrase it as a dichotomy, but I think that's not so. I think it's very important. There are serious isurim involved in transgressing the laws of kashrus, and I've been a mashgiach in a restaurant, and I think there's definitely, if you don't have careful supervision, there's definitely a lot that could go wrong. So it's definitely, I think, justified and legitimate to be meticulous about kosher certification, but I think it's become culturally, sociologically, that we really go with the highest standards. If there's any question that a certain certification may be unreliable, or we're not sure if this person's standards in their home are up to par, so then we'll many times err on the side of caution. We don't say, oh, maybe it's kosher, it's probably kosher, or this has this certification, so someone says it's kosher, or I'll just think about it myself. No, we try to ascertain it. If it has a questionable hashgach, we probably don't eat it. And for Lashon Hara, I think even more so, that many of us are.
How does one also determine questionable hashgach?
I think there are certain hashgachas that, I don't know, you could say there could be various reasons, but I think some of them outside of politics are known. Even the standards that they advertise are not up to standards that perhaps most rabbis or encourage, or most people expect to be following or would follow in their own homes. So I think many times we're unsure, but with something like Lashon Hara, when many people, say including myself, don't know all of the laws,
There are some websites you can use.
see
And also
Kosher Quest. Yeah.
Is there actually a deli in the neighborhood that advertises as kosher, but they have no hashgachah?
Ben's, Doug, I once sat in there, then I realized there was no one with Yamaka in there.
Supernational?
I don't know if the yarmulke means something.
Supernational is a triangle K.
Yeah, I know.
So right, so there. I know there that other restaurants. So in that case, they do have someone certifying it, but it's open on Shabbos. So
Ben's has an hashgachah.
okay,
No, there is.
they're open on. I think that's a good example where it's not up to question. They're open on Shabbos, so whoever gives hashgacha accepts that. But
So was Bagel Ball.
I mean, I don't know.
okay, so
Like whether it matters, but there is such a restaurant.
right, they're right. The point is.
Lashon Hara is that it's more that you're damaging other people. Kashrus is that you're damaging yourself. So it's like driving a car.
Could be both. Lashon Hara, you're also damaging yourself. You're gonna do that.
I'm saying so too. Like with kashrus, like if you eat something, put it in your body, you're only having a direct effect on yourself.
Right. Maybe it should be
With
taken.
Lashon Hara, you can do irreparable damage to numerous people at once.
So then should
Should
be taken more seriously.
We'll make a phrase like there's not only glad kosher, but should also be
Glad Yosher, I think that was Schwab. Yeah.
Brian, Brian.
Yeah, that's a cupcake.
It meant more financially.
Yeah, financially. Treating their workers right, and
The cupcake?
paying the taxes.
So I think maybe when it comes.
It is cup, right?
So
Right, it's a cup, right?
So I think. So
Okay, is not, I was told is not reliable.
Yeah.
It's not so. It's not going to restaurants. like right now.
Just because it has an hashgacha.
I think this is a perfect example of, if we were all going out to lunch, we have pizza here under the okay, so we don't need to. But if we were going out to lunch, it'd probably be difficult to decide. We'd probably be very careful if there's a question of hashgacha that we're talking about now, and we're not sure. Maybe it's kosher. There might be a place where even if it's lower standards, you might not be over any yisurim. It's possible. We'd probably all collectively decide on a place that is more or less without question kosher. I mean, we don't have, the longest pay of Sefirot, but there might be places that we would go that other people wouldn't go. But I think collectively we would decide on places that generally have a reputation of having strict standards, and we wouldn't kind of play the guessing game that we might do with Lashon Hara. That maybe and I think this could also go, how frequently do we ask shilas before we do something?
The classic line is, "This is totally Lashon Hara, but," and then
But I'm not trying to speak
right?
Lashon Hara, but.
No one would ever say, this place isn't kosher, but I'm just going to go eat there. Well, people would say that, but generally
People whose observance is generally higher would say that with stuff like kashrus, but they might not say that or with stuff like Lashon Hara. And I think and he points this out here, but I think it's true that things that mitzvahs have greater mazel, that people are more careful and meticulous in observing them when there's social pressure, even a certain social emphasis on importance. I think there are areas in halacha we don't have to go through now that maybe have Baruch Hashem improved because there's more of a social awareness of them. But I think Rav Belsky said that, he pointed that before, that what you need to do to have mitzvah be observed, I think he was speaking about financial matters, is that if it were the same stigma that there would be for other things, so then things would probably be observed a lot more meticulously. And maybe a way to gauge is someone is asking shilas about other areas that maybe they even know more about, but isn't asking shilas in this area, then maybe it's a question how careful we are. I remember a couple of years ago, this book.